Hi everybody, this is August 13th, 2026, and I've been posting these videos as a form of recovery from the trauma of watching my little brother, Paul Cairns, 64, with Down syndrome, be locked away by the British Columbia New Democratic Party government for 588 days after we had spent a lifetime of visiting at will. I had taken Paul to Newfoundland twice. Excuse me. So they locked Paul away when they discovered I had complained I had complained to the police when I found what I alleged to be a fraudulent and forged power of attorney the government created to appoint my then 82-year-old Catholic nun sister 4,000 kilometers away in Ontario as Paul's guardian. Paul lived here in Greater Vancouver, and my sisters and my mother and I had cared for Paul. The nun had only met Paul on a few occasions over the course of her life and did not understand speech or communication. So when I complained to the police, I got a letter from the nun's lawyer saying that my visits with Paul that I had arranged through the government, 2 visits a week, once at his group home and once here in my apartment, were canceled, permanently terminated. And then I got a letter from the group home's lawyer saying I would never see him again. Eventually, they let us have a telephone call. We could speak on the phone for 10 minutes a week, and he begged for me to visit him. It was torture for the both of us. He was my last surviving family member in Greater Vancouver. I was his last surviving family member and visitor. So this resulted in being locked away, isolated and confined, just like a prisoner in a prison. After I did everything I could think of to try and restore Paul's visits, I'm a former psychologist for the government of British Columbia, and then I went to law school. I graduated law school as the first single mother in British Columbia history to graduate from law school. I was a federal prosecutor for several years. Then I worked as a family lawyer for the current head leader of the opposition, Carrie Lynn Finlay. And then I went out on my own and I practiced law full-time until 2008 when I was disabled in an accident. And then I retired from law altogether in 2016. So they locked Paul away when I complained to the police about what I alleged to be, as I said, a fraudulent and forged power of attorney. I know it was a forgery because I taught Paul to print the only word. It took me about a year as a little girl to teach him to print the only word that he could ever print. This is a sample of a signature, and I could see the signature on the document was a forgery. So I tried everything I could think of legally and civilly to restore Paul's visits. I tried to be appointed as guardian. I was not successful. I tried to restore the visits. I was not successful. And then 588 days after Paul had been locked away, I got an email from the nun's lawyer. She had 2 law firms working for her around the clock. Charles Gibson in Ottawa and Casey Deanshaw here in Vancouver with the law firm Borden, Ladner, Gervais in downtown Vancouver. It's one of the biggest Canadian law firms. And I estimate the Catholic Church spent more than $2 million on legal representation to try and uphold the fraudulent and forged power of attorney. So I got a call from Casey Deanshaw in Vancouver. He said that Paul had had a stroke and I could arrange a visit with him by email. Now, they allowed me to visit with Paul in person after 588 days because I guess they believed I wouldn't be able to get a sample of his signature. The reason they terminated our visits was so that I couldn't get an authentic sample of his signature or have him tested to show that he wasn't capable of appointing a representative. I was allowed to visit Paul for 10 minutes a day at the Burnaby Hospital, and he had an oxygen mask and a ventilator. He had all the normal medical supports, but he appeared to be recovering remarkably well. He sat up He grabbed the book from my hand, turned the pages perfectly. He squeezed my hand so hard when I said my name. He made good eye contact. And while I was waiting to visit him, although I was only allowed to visit him for 10 minutes per day, I sat in the hallway for 10 to 12 hours a day, and I got a phone call from the Burnaby RCMP police. They said that they'd been ordered by Ottawa to reopen the investigation into the fraudulent and forged power of attorney. I was thrilled. I thought, oh, this is the breakthrough that we needed. Finally, somebody's listening. We're going to get the police involved, and Paul will be freed. But so I went to court the next morning, and I tried to get the judge to suspend the nun's authority over Paul. She had flown in from Ontario and would only let me visit him for 10 minutes a day. When I got back, once the nun found out that I'd been contacted by the RCMP about her being investigated for the fraudulent and forged power of attorney, I thought, Paul's going to be in danger, because the way she thinks is that if Paul's dead, the police could not do an investigation. So when I got back, I didn't get the court order. We didn't get on. And by the time I got back to the hospital, the nun met me at Paul's door of his room. And I could see that all of his medical supports, like his oxygen mask and his ventilator, had been stripped away. And she said through gritted teeth, "Say goodbye to Paul, he's dying." But he appeared to me to already be dead. They had killed him in that time period, that he was lying perfectly still on the bed. All his medical supports had been stripped away, his oxygen mask, his ventilator, and he was lying perfectly still. His eyes were wide open, and his pupils were dilated and fixed. His hand was cold. I've seen dead people before, and he was dead. If he had a funeral, I was never told. I don't know where they had placed him. So after Paul died, the nun then brought on an application to have me designated permanently. So I practiced law for 23 years and pretty successfully for a sole practitioner. But she brought on an application. She had her two law firms together, both lawyers. The Ottawa lawyer flew in, and they had an application, a 4-day application, to have me designated permanently as a vexatious litigant. It's a very rare and unusual designation in Canadian law, which strips me of all of my rights and access to the Canadian courts. So they took away all of Paul's rights, all of his freedoms, and then when he died, and they couldn't do anything more to him, then they went after me. After a 4-day hearing, the judge, without my materials, I had filed responding materials, but the nun's lawyers didn't include them in the materials before the judge when I was there. And so all they had was her materials. And the judge, Judith E. Hoffman, designated me permanently a vexatious litigant, removing all of my access to Canadian courts after I had represented many clients on many occasions and pretty successfully. I can't even file an affidavit. If you sued me, I couldn't respond without permission of a judge. So even before Paul was killed, even before Paul was killed, excuse me, even before Paul was killed, I noticed a change in law, a massive change in law, where the most serious criminal offense that has been a hanging offense throughout Canadian history, homicide for first-degree murder, was changed to a medical procedure that where Canadian citizens can be killed by the government at the government's expense. And I had noticed that. I've been posting these little videos on YouTube since 2021. And I thought, how the hell did that happen? How did it go from first-degree murder, where you'd be hanged for it, until 1976, when the Parliament of Canada changed the law so that the government couldn't kill Canadian citizens, and that was for civilians in 1976 and for military staff in 1999. So when I was a federal prosecutor, technically, I could have, if the issue came up, I could have prosecuted somebody with a criminal penalty of death until 1999. But it changed from that to where doctors can kill people, the government at the government's expense, at taxpayer expense. And so what I discovered was that there was a decision where the Supreme Court of Canada, which is 9 unelected civil servants appointed by the government, get to decide things. And with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms that was brought in by Pierre Trudeau in 1982, we've seen a lot of activist judges just taking away the democratic rights of Canadians. And this is what happened in February of 2015. The Supreme Court of Canada unanimously and anonymously, usually court decisions are authored by a particular judge, and then other judges can dissent or disagree, and it's the majority that wins. But in this case, they reversed their earlier decision where they refused to accept any changes to allow to the criminal code to allow euthanasia. That was a case called Canada versus Sue Rodriguez. So they reversed their own decision in February of 2015 for this woman who named Kay Carter, who was already dead. She wasn't terminally ill. She had a back condition called spinal stenosis. And the decision, the unanimous decision of the Supreme Court of Canada said it wasn't fair to her, even though she was long dead. She'd already gone to Switzerland and been killed by a doctor in Switzerland. They said it wasn't fair that she had to wait, that because suicide was, legal. The suicide used to be a criminal offense, but it was not. So since suicide was legal for other citizens to do, it wasn't fair that Kay Carter had to wait until she became terminally ill, at a point when she might not be able to kill herself, so that other people could kill her. So they reversed their earlier decision where they said it was not in the public interest to allow euthanasia. And it's a sloppy written decision. It makes no sense. It was a moot case because Kay Carter was already dead. So they upturned the most serious criminal offense in the criminal code for a woman who was already dead in a moot case. And since that time, 103,000 innocent, vulnerable Canadians. So what the Supreme Court of Canada said was that the government of Canada, they didn't set out any safety mechanisms to protect. They didn't ask the hard question, like, what if everybody wants to commit suicide? Or what if almost, everybody sees it as some kind of right to commit suicide? What will we do then? How will we? They didn't set up any system, any safety mechanisms to protect vulnerable people at all. What they did was they gave the government of Canada a year to come up with a system to be able to kill Canadian citizens, something that was abolished by our own parliament back in 1976 for civilians, and then again in 1999. So when Parliament had a chance, it said no killing of civilians, even people who murder others, because we don't know what death is. We don't know what the punishment is. Is it hell? Is it reincarnation? Is it cessation of consciousness? What is it? Nobody knows. It's not a medical procedure because medical is from the Greek verb to heal. And you don't heal anyone with a lethal injection. And the other reason that capital punishment was abolished is because it's irreversible. There's very few decisions in life that are irreversible, but capital punishment or euthanasia is completely irreversible. People don't get a chance to change their minds. And very often people want to change their minds. And I was shocked. It was a sloppy, ridiculous decision, with not taking into account human nature. I mean, in the history of the 40,000 years of human civilization, no civilization has ever come up with a system for safely euthanizing citizens where vulnerable people are protected. That's why there's a prohibition against murder. Canada kills 45 people a day. All it takes is a signature of any doctor. The doctor does not need to be a specialist in the condition that the person is suffering from. They don't need to know the person. And any doctor or any nurse, it's not a sworn affidavit. It's not when you get a divorce, you have to swear an affidavit. So my background was as a divorce lawyer, and every divorce application had to be supervised and signed off by a judge. And that's why I'm saying that this medical assistance in dying, and never use that word MAiD. It's euthanasia or murder or homicide. Don't use made-up propaganda words. It sounds so nice, like an angel from heaven coming down and gathering you up in her arms. Well, that isn't what happens. Is a doctor that you don't know or a nurse that you don't know signs a piece of paper, and sometimes against the will. There have been documented cases of people being either silent when they're asked at the end if they consent and being euthanized anyways, or the doctor told the family to hold the person down and he killed them. Anyways, my father was a safety engineer, and he worked in industries. First, he worked as an underground in nickel mines in Sudbury, and Sudbury has benefited Canada. I just asked, excuse me, I just asked ChatGPT what was the value of nickel extracted from Sudbury mines during the time when my dad was there. And they said $25 billion just from 1940 till 1955 when my dad worked underground. And then my dad was the co-designer of the Churchill Falls Hydroelectric project. He designed the interior ceiling of the underground structure for the Churchill Falls Hydroelectric project in Labrador. So the Sudbury mines in the time that my dad was there produced $25 billion in current dollars worth of nickel for the world. 40% of all the nickel used by the Allies, all of the Allies, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth, and Canada, the United States, were produced by my dad's little mine. And over the course of his career there in Sudbury, they produced $25 billion in wealth for Canada. And to date, the Churchill Falls Hydroelectric project has produced between $100 and $150 billion worth of hydroelectric power. So my dad was used to working in a system that produced high value for society, but he was a safety engineer, so his responsibility was to ensure that people were not killed recklessly or needlessly in the process of creating wealth for the country. And there's been no system like that developed in the system that's been developed. There was no system developed by the Supreme Court of Canada or even contemplating. And the question that they should have asked is, what if everybody feels that it's their moral obligation or their duty, their civic duty, to be killed? Which is what I believe what's happened, because anyone knows that inevitably the right to die becomes the duty to die. And almost 100% of the people that are being killed by Canada are of European descent, white people just like me, with multiple medical complications just like me. I'm exactly the kind of person. And I am one bad day and one bad decision from being euthanized like a dog in Canada. And it was illegal. So the last thing that sticks out for me is when you look at the Supreme Court of Canada that made this decision that turned the Commonwealth law on its head, was headed by a woman named Beverly McLaughlin, whom I've met. I went to a Women in the Law conference with her when I was in law school. And she immediately, in 2018, went to work for the Communist Party of China, our arch enemy in the world, the enemy of Western civilization, for 6 years as Court of Appeal judge in Hong Kong. And as far as I'm concerned, this decision, the decision that she made, my question for Beverly McLaughlin is, were you influenced by the Communist Party of China, for whom you immediately became an employee at the time when you made a decision that's resulted in the extrajudicial executions of 103,000 innocent, vulnerable Canadians? There's no euthanasia in China. But what they do is they execute their members, their political opponents, like the Falun Gong, and they harvest their organs for the Communist Party elite. So I believe that the Communist Party, which has infiltrated every area of Canadian political life, is behind this decision of euthanasia in Canada. Excuse me. That's all I have to say for today. I hope you, thank you so much for taking the time to watch these ramblings. Take care.